Hello, and welcome to tonight's remarkable Podversation. I'm your host, Red Bull Theater's Associate Artistic Director, Nathan Winkelstein. Thank you all for joining us. For those of you doing so for the first time, these are informal conversations designed to provide insight into how great classical performers, directors, designers, artists approach character and text with a special focus on Shakespeare's characters and texts. And part of that discussion is all of you watching. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can type in questions into your various chat functions, and we will answer as many of them as we can as we go along or near the end. So please do engage with us. Tonight's conversation will focus on one of Shakespeare's great comedic plays, Much Ado About Nothing, and specifically on the dynamic and charismatic leading man, Benedick. We will be focusing on Benedick's soliloquies in Act 2, Scene 3. If you want to follow along, you can obviously find those anywhere online, and they may get dropped in the chat soon. Our guest tonight is a rising star of stage and screen. He has appeared in leading roles on New York stages numerous times. He starred in Shakespeare productions regionally and in the city, including the titular Dane in Hamlet at the Old Globe and many others. His movie credits are extensive and growing at a breakneck pace, and he has starred in this very role that we will be discussing in Shakespeare in the Park in the 2019 smash production helmed by Kenny Leon. He's done multiple Red Bull readings for us over this last year, including starring in our reading of Kean and Pericles. And I am thrilled he has taken time in his meteoric rise to nerd out with me about Shakespeare. He is, of course, the great Grantham Coleman. Hi, Grantham.
Nice to informally see you this fine evening.
Yeah, it's nice. It's one of those things where it's like, I think we've met once physically in person, and yet I feel like we've worked together so many times.
Hey, I was all over your office for that week.
Yes. He filmed the Pericles reading from our office. This is the world we live in now, folks. Theater. Grantham, thank you so much for taking time. I know you just got off a lot of work. I'm not sure how much you can talk about, and just got back to New York. So I appreciate it. I hope you're not too jet lagged. And I definitely appreciate you being here this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to start with you reading some of the lines that we're going to be discussing and using as a starting off point for those of you at home who aren't super familiar with Much Ado About Nothing. This is a play about, well, it's about love, like most of his comedies, but it's a play where Benedick, the leading man, and his buddy Claudio are returning from battle, and they come to the house of Leonato to stay for a little while. Leonato has a daughter, Hero, and a niece, Beatrice. Benedick and Beatrice have had a relationship in the past, somewhat unclear exactly what that was. I'm sure that'll come up in discussion. And during the course of the play up to this point, Hero and Claudio have formed a connection and have become engaged, and Benedick is struggling, shall we say, with man's propensity to do this idiotic thing called falling in love. And so he feels like he needs to chat about it with the audience. And I'll hand it off to you on that note, Grant.
I do much wonder that one man, seeing how much another man is a fool when he dedicates his behaviors to love, will, after he hath laughed at such shallow follies in others, become the argument of his own scorn by falling in love. And such a man is Claudio. He was wont to speak plain and to the purpose, like an honest man and a soldier, and now is he turned orthography. His words are a very fantastical banquet, just so many strange dishes. May I be so converted and see with these eyes? I cannot tell. I think not. I will not be sworn, but love may transform me to an oyster. I'll take my oath on it. Till he have made an oyster of me, he shall never make me such a fool. One woman is fair, yet I am well. Another is wise, yet I am well. Another virtuous, yet I am well. But till all graces be in one woman shall not come in my grace. Rich she shall be, that's certain. Wise, or I'll none. Virtuous, or I'll never cheapen her. Fair, or I'll never look on her. Mild, come not near me. Noble, or not I for an angel. Of good discourse, an excellent musician, and her hair shall be of what color it please God. Oh, the prince and Monsieur Love. I will hide me in the arbor.
Yay! Good. Thank you, Grantham. Thanks. Thanks for reading that. We will peek behind the curtain. We had actually discussed the soliloquies, both soliloquies in this Act 3, Scene 2, and they share some commonalities and are actually kind of playing off one another, as we'll get to. And I might ask you to read the other one too when we get to that. Nothing like taking advantage of the talent I've got on screen with me. So let's start just with the situation, because I find it, well, it's interesting. Shakespeare has the line, "The lady doth protest too much." This is not a lady, but it is interesting to me that a man who seems so dismissive of love comes out and then has a whole soliloquy talking about what a lady would have to be like for him to love him, and kind of focusing on that. And can you talk a little bit about, I guess, well, where you would start with any monologue, right? Was like, what is the motivation for Benedick to come out and talk to us, the audience, about this? How did you find that motivation to do this, rather than just saying words, you know?
Well, I think Benedick's interesting because, I mean, there are a lot of characters in Shakespeare with soliloquies, with monologues, but there's always, at least to me, like 3 different ways someone has a soliloquy. It's either the private thought, like the moment that we just get to hear somehow, like the person is just speaking their own thoughts. Then there's, I'm talking to someone and that other person can't respond, be it like the audience or another character in the play or someone I don't know who's listening. And then the third one would be to the heavens, like to God, like someone expressing their massive universal thoughts and declaring their, the loves or like the revenge or those things. And I think Benedick is different because he gets to have a whole bit with the audience, and it's not exclusive to one speech. He has a lot of speeches that are there, and it's really one of those like, okay, it's very clear who this is for. This is for you all to understand where I'm coming from, because I obviously can't talk to my best friend Claudio because he's lost in Gaga land and love. So I think with this speech, I just kind of started from like, okay, who am I talking to? The audience. For whose benefit? Obviously for mine, because as Benedick, I believe myself to be God's gift to the world, let alone women. And one should be so lucky to grab me off the streets, because Benedick in the story is apparently a very good soldier. He's not a man of no consequence. He's coming from battle with Claudio, who's also being well renowned for his latest displays in the war. And we come to Leonardo's house to take a break from fighting, I guess, for a siesta. And so that is the nothing. That is the nothing that there's much to do about. The real thing is happening elsewhere, outside. We're at war. We're here. What are you guys going to do? Oh, we're going to talk about things we've done and try and find women. Except Benedick is very much, I'm too much of the man's man, I've had too much fun doing what I do to like be trapped down by a woman. Although at one point he was, and either you can go with Beatrice betrayed him or he betrayed Beatrice. And since then he's kind of like, well, there's no woman better than her, so I will have nothing to do with them. And I think this speech is still him trying to wrap his mind around like, how could Claudio fall in love with a hero? She's not even a Beatrice. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. There's a ton of different strings to pull on that one, but let's talk about, because I do think that it seems formative to the entire play, is this nature of your relationship with Beatrice. Is that this? I mean, this soliloquy to me as I read it and as I watched your performance at the Public Theater, it seems to be prompted by two different events. It seems to be prompted by Claudio falling head over heels for Hero. That one's really obvious, right? Like that's the very clear event that has just happened. But also your last exchange with Beatrice, where she managed in a masquerade to get pretty seriously under your skin in a way that how Benedick seems to self-proclaim himself, you wouldn't, if he were telling the truth about his feelings about women, you wouldn't think that she could get under his skin that easily.
Oh yeah.
And so it does seem like this, obviously it's what the play is about, this core relationship and what it was before the play began. Does that have to be explicit to you and the actor playing Beatrice when you go into a production? How much was that talked about or worked on when you did the play?
Well, I was extremely lucky. I had Danielle Brooks and Kenny also. We all agree that there was something that happened before. Now, how much of it happened was kind of left to me and Danielle, and like we went to school together, so like we had a really good rapport to begin with. But also, I think it was one of those like he knows he messed up, and rather than being like the person to be like, "Oh, baby, I'm sorry," and say it in front of everyone, he chose the exact opposite thing to be like, "I never liked her in the first place," and which definitely she's probably the wrong person to do that to, because she's the only person in the play that matches him and tops him. Like I think she wins the first two I guess banter battles, if you will. Like he doesn't win, and it's up until that point, I think, in this scene where he realizes like, oh wow, I can't beat her, so I must be in love with her. But we definitely discuss like I, as Benedick, messed up, but I didn't know what to do with that actual like being vulnerable. And rather than declaring and making myself known to the world as the person who loves this woman, I just chose to run away to war.
Yeah, well, and that I think that is, it's one of the things that I've always loved about Shakespeare is that like, look, there's a lot of things in Much Ado, including like the drama that comes up that is like a little bit of a stretch from a plot perspective, right? Like the audience kind of goes, sure, we'll roll with this. It's a comedy.
Yeah.
But that at its core, there is what you just described. There is this extremely human failing that Benedick has, right? Is that like, what are the hardest things to say in life, right? It's please, I'm sorry, and Worcestershire sauce. And the and like he can't say. I think that's lovely that he can't say it, and I do think she struggles to engage with him as well, and that's why the whole trick that happens right after this soliloquy happens. But I guess it does make me wonder, when you were doing this speech, how much of it is about your frustration with your best friend Claudio, and how much of it is your frustration with yourself and your feelings about Beatrice? Did you deal with that at all when you were preparing this piece?
The other very, very, very lucky moment that we had was Jeremy Harris, who played Claudio, was also one of my best friends from school. So we'd had several years of conversations about he or I being like, man, I don't know, I'm in love, and I can't control it. And the other one being like, man, calm down, that's not love. So being able to extrapolate that to what we're actually dealing with here, and Benedick being like, you're not in love. You think that's love? That's not love. Like, you don't know what you're saying, because you can't possibly be in love because she's not Beatrice, which is what my thoughts are. But right. It just comes out in the normal ribbing of him being like, you know, you're supposed to be a soldier. You're supposed to be an honest man. You're supposed to love the fight. Why are you trying to woo this person? And I think it's more the jealousy of being able to have those feelings and express them, versus knowing that like, as soon as I do this, I can't take it back, because she knows, and then she told other people, and I denied it. So once I see these feelings again, everyone knows that I lied in the first place. It was my struggle with
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting because I think like you talked at in the beginning about the different forms of soliloquies, and I can't say that I necessarily 100% agree. But I'm like super curious actually if you have, and if you don't, it's fine. But if you have off the top of your head an example of a soliloquy that of the other two forms, because I'm completely with you about like to the audience, like let's talk through my stuff with you, which seems to be how you approached it with Benedick. Do you have off the top of your head speeches that you think fall under the other categories?
Yeah, well, I would think to be or not to be is one of those that what makes it really difficult is it is the what's the word when your thoughts are flowing out as you're thinking them.
Stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness. Yeah, he just happens to think lightning fast, so it comes out in this beautiful speech. But that one's not necessarily to God, in my opinion, or to the audience, because as soon as he lets someone else in, he has relief because someone else knows the burden that's on him, but he can't let someone else in because his father told him not to, essentially. And then for the one to the heavens, the first speech in Hamlet, once they have the "Yay, we're married now" banquet, and they all leave.
Oh, that this too sullied flesh.
Yes.
Or solid flesh. Sorry, different versions.
Yeah,
But yeah.
that would be him begging, "Oh, please!" Like that, like he's literally in conversation with God, saying, "Everlasting canon, all these things. Please change this or do something. Like help me through this." And then
And well, I don't want to go. We could do a podcast about Hamlet. But it is, yeah, it's interesting. So those are great. Those are two really interesting examples of that. I mean, the that this too solid flesh, to me, when he gets to that it should come to this aspect of that speech, it does seem like he's like, let me tell the audience, hey, so this is where we're at. Yo.
Oh, they all have bits and pieces. Like I think just in terms of to give them to give an actor a clear persona who they're speaking to, which might give them a way of how they're doing it and like how they can build and go and shape and change, because it might start internally and then it might become a conversation to your peers, but then the biggest question of all might have to be left up above, because all Shakespeare's plays have that element of what is it religion versus fate or determinism, and like there's all these bigger questions that are asked about humanity inside them. And I think like for me it's helpful to have those like three shapes to know like, okay, where am I starting and where am I ending and where am I going, because there's always the element of, well, it's funny because when I was in high school I was doing the "This Can Be No Trick" monologue.
Let me just give context. So "This Can Be No Trick" is the partner soliloquy to this one. It happens after the scene that comes right after this soliloquy, where basically he's tricked, where the other men have set up a trap where they're going to talk about how much Beatrice loves him, and then the women are going to talk in front of Beatrice about how much Benedick loves them to get the two of them to admit that they love each other. He hears this, and then he does the "This Shall Be No Trick" soliloquy. But so continue. You've been doing that since high school?
Yeah, it was one of my like college audition like monologues, and it's just always so fun because there's so many different ways to approach it. And I had been doing it, I think, kind of just straight to the audience, without another level of like who might be there. And then one of the professors at one of the colleges was like, "What if Beatrice was right outside the door? What if she was like right behind you versus like nowhere near?" And it completely changed the funnel and the scope of how the piece might begin and how it might end. So I think there's always multiple like levels of who is listening and who is it to, who is it for. But I think having the three shapes to start with at least always helps me.
So it's sort of, I think that there's it's not literally, but it sort of feels like some people talk about like the third circle, second circle, and first circle of focus. Of like, first circle is self, second circle is sort of self and just the people around them, and third is more global. Of like being able to maneuver between them in terms of like, there are some thoughts a person can only have with their private self, and there are some thoughts that one needs to share, and some thoughts that need an all-powerful thing to bounce off of. That's interesting. So, go ahead.
Well, no, I just like it saves an actor sometimes from the trap of something becoming rhetorical. Like, because you can ask yourself a question, and either you answer it or you don't. You can ask an audience a question; they're not allowed to talk. But if you ask the questions of the heavens and you wait for an answer and it never comes, what happens then? What do you do next? Like,
Right. Yeah, though of course thinking about well the push there is that thinking about audiences from 400 years ago, they might have answered.
Oh yeah, they might
So
answer.
the groundlings would certainly, you know, the I don't know. I feel like a few of Hamlet's questions where he's like, "Am I a coward?" I'm sure that he got some responses
Oh
from
yeah,
Hamlet's. Like, yeah,
they're
no,
like,
you are, dude.
hurry up.
Yeah, let's go. We're in hour 4. It is dark. But the so in this speech, then, speaking of a speech with lots of questions, um, shall I be so converted and all of that? Um, you think that most of this speech is really to the audience?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think because, like you said, like there is a very comical thing of like asking an audience member a question and then you see their face go like, "Am I supposed to talk? Can I talk?" Like, I can't. I'm not gonna say it. But then you move the speech along. But like, there's those moments where it's like you cannot answer this. If you can get your answer in, say it. But yeah, I think it's one of those like I believe you have in your notes, to steal your note before you can say it, like the stand-up routine aspect. Like, we go to see a stand-up comic, and the funniest ones make it feel like a conversation, but we never said anything. We just laugh. Our laughter is the response that keeps the story or the jokes or whatever going. So it is a conversation. It just happens to sound one-sided. I think this speech is a good example of all the thoughts changes in it, where like you could like search for it and try and find it and like really wrestle with like, why doesn't he answer that? Why does he go to the next thing? Shakespeare made it funny for a reason, so that like the laughter literally builds you to the next thing. Or that is my idea of how it kind of like goes, and why he changes thoughts, and why he does get into the tertiary minutia of some of the things, but then also just like goes, what about this? I don't know. I could be converted. It might make an oyster out of me, but I'll tell you this.
Yeah, so that I guess is the stand-up comic thing has always been interesting to me because, as you said, the best always make it feel like a conversation, but the best also seem to be clearly using their stand-up as a way to frame their kind of deepest questions for themselves. So like if you listen to a Mike Birbiglia or a Mulaney, these sort of, they seem almost stream of consciousness storytellers rather than like joke. And like Birbiglia is just an example, goes into some dark stuff in his comedy. And it seems like I guess that's the part of this that I still find interesting is like, why does he need in this moment to turn to this audience of 800 people to talk about and it seems to me like the turn in the speech is, I think you just said it, is that may I be so converted and see with these eyes, right? You spend the first speech being like, look, they're goofy, right? Men are dumb.
Yeah.
How Claudio can do this, and then have this sort of strangely vulnerable question of like, am I vulnerable to this? And I guess I wonder what it was for you that prompted your Benedick to ask this question now, and to ask it of the audience as opposed to, say, of the prince, for example, who's a very understanding, thoughtful guy. And you may have already answered it about like he's got himself in sort of an emotional trap by having avoided ever admitting he cared about Beatrice, but do you have an answer for that? It's fine if you don't.
Well, I think in the change, going to the may I be so converted and see with these eyes, I cannot tell. I think not. I will not be sworn, but love may transform me to an oyster. I think in his, like you said, the build of him saying like, oh, these guys are idiots, these guys are dumb. It's the first possibly honest moment. The first, like, he's caught out because he's probably knows that I can't, like, because he could say, I won't be.
Right. Yeah. And he doesn't, which is fascinating.
And he doesn't. Yeah. So I think there's something in there. I always just kind of I love doing it, so I was always playing with it, and it is prose, so it lends itself to like some playing around with, versus like some meter that's like you have to do it like this all the time. But I think for me it was very much okay if I'm going to fall in love, because first he says, "Could I be converted?" I don't think I could, but hey, I won't rule it out. But if I am going to, now let me imagine this completely made up woman, knowing for a fact I'm comparing her to one real solid person that I know.
Right.
So I think that is the bridge for him asking himself these things. To once again be Benedick and go like, yeah, enough about other people. Let me talk about myself. Which is why in our production I was like, can I have blonde hair? So that it's very easy to go like, oh yeah, that guy's Benedick.
Right. Yeah. The guy who who cares about what he looks like to other people in a way. Yeah.
In a war.
In a war. He's got his hair's perfect. In a war. You mentioned in there the verse prose question. Just to again clarify for the audience, Much Ado About Nothing, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong here. I believe Much Ado About Nothing is the only Shakespeare play that is exclusively in prose, as opposed to verse. And so that basically means it's not an iambic pentameter. It's more free form. Which is a little bit odd because these characters, while not kings and queens, are certainly not commoners, which tend to be the ones who go into prose. So it's a little bit odd that he's done this comedy in prose completely. And attacking prose is very different from attacking verse. Did you find it? I will admit openly that I, both as a director and before as a performer, actually struggled immensely with prose compared to verse. How did you find just like attacking this language, this extremely muscular language in prose? How did you find that work? Like the real table work, I sit down with the language and think about how I'm going to say it.
I find prose oddly freeing, just on a personal level, because a lot of the times people think of Shakespeare and they think of, iambic pentameter. They think of like rhyming couplets and these loud, strangely English sounding people in thick leather boots standing on things and proclaiming stuff. And honestly, he was a great poet. There's a lot of wonderful poetry, and there's a lot of meanings with the vowels and consonants that you can find in verse, and it can make it so juicy to tear into. But my only trap with it was that like there's not much else you can do outside of it, because you do want to lean in the line endings. You do want to carry the vowels and hit the consonants, but like so and so can also do the same thing with the same verse. Whereas prose is how people spoke then. I think a lot of our plays now are definitely in prose. We read more prose than we do verse, and it's always the commentary on how people speak at the time. And I think there's something there that just allows me as an actor to almost put it in my own words, to sound and feel more organic than basically trying to make things that are verse sound like they aren't. That's pretty. Whenever I get verse that's not like a poem or like, something that does happen. Like there's verse in this play, but it's the letter
right.
to, the letter from Hero at her death. But with prose, I feel like it gives me the license and the right to, we can take some time here. We can see if velocity can squeeze in here. We can see if there's any joke or something to be mined from a pause or a caesura that it's just going to stay there and happen. Whereas like the verse kind of like, it keeps the train going. You feel this driving force and you can't really hop off of it. Whereas I feel like you can with prose. Stop me when I'm rambling.
No. I am hesitating only because it's again something that you and I differ on. just in that I find the structure of the verse liberating. It's for me, it's like it's the framework of a building, or the rhythm in jazz, even though the rhythm in jazz is trochaic, not iambic, but that's the nerdiest sentence I've ever said in my life, so I'll move off it. But it is, I guess for me, maybe I was lucky enough to be told that, like, the verse are suggestions, not rules. Like, it's sort of a way to be directed by Shakespeare, but if you disagree with him, you can do your own thing. So then I find it liberating, but I also get utterly lost in prose, and I think it makes a lot of sense that it's a cool way to. I never thought about it as a way of just connecting to how the people spoke, truly, actually spoke. It wasn't heightened; it was just real.
Mm-hmm.
Which then, of course, begs the question of a man in Benedick's case, who, oh gosh, I'm sorry, are we ever given your title? I know Claudio is a count. Are
He's
you
just
also
always Signor. They just
Yeah.
refer to him as Signor. But I think in terms of military status, he has some title. He is, I think, some sort of superior rank.
Yeah, so he's probably what we would call today a commissioned officer, rather than an NCO, rather than a non-commissioned officer, which is the ranks of the gentleman, which also makes sense with Signor. So like that in most plays would be verse. And so I guess it is interesting to me then, because I consider the relationship that Benedick has with Beatrice to be one of the more mature for plays that are about the forming of a relationship, if that makes sense. So not the Antony and Cleopatra, not the Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, but compared to the Romeo and Juliets of the world, or frankly, the Claudios and Heroes of the world, Benedick and Beatrice, because of their shared history and the way they interact with one another, it feels more adult and more dynamic in that way than others. And I wonder if there was something inside Shakespeare's desire to present this more realistic, less romanticized version of an adult relationship that made him want to put it into prose rather than verse, make it a little less Romeo and Juliet.
Well, I think it goes to that point where you have the youth version of love that he puts in a lot of plays, where it's the guy writing sonnets, and I'm just so overwhelmed with passion about this person. I'll fake my own death and meet you someplace, and I'll give someone a letter, and like all these, great plot devices. But the foolishness that we do as youth in love. Versus, I think this relationship for Beatrice and Benedick, it's possibly the second time around, possibly the third time around, possibly they went their whole youth without having found someone. And it's not a, for lack of better words, passionate, like, I see your face before me everywhere I go. It's that they're mentally in love with one another. It is a mature love. It is something like, oh wow, like I like how your mind works, and your mind works similar to my mind, which it can either be very frustrating or completely enlightening. And there's some of that with Kate and Petruchio, but that's a much more harsh, I think.
For sure.
Yeah, like.
But it's really interesting. Sorry, it's amazing that you brought that up, because I have sometimes seen Much Ado About Nothing as sort of Shakespeare's apology for Taming of the Shrew. Is like, let's actually acknowledge the shrew, the what I called a shrew in the first one, who is this incredibly intellectual, very witty woman who's being forced to act as if she's some debutante and therefore acts out. Let's put her into a position where she's not being asked to act like a debutante, where people actually find her fun and see how incredibly charismatic she might be, and see if a Petruchio style character who's not I mean, this speech, he's got a little tiny bit of toxic masculinity, but he's not a misogynist.
Yeah.
See what a true wit comes in and actually sees their equal, and they end happily. Like the final bit of the play between the two of you is you guys making jokes at one another, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're still going, but they're lovely jokes between two people who enjoy spending time with each other versus, like, I guess the Kate in particular thing always kind of weirds me out or throws me off. But I think the difference there is there's no history between them, and they are immediately responding, which is still kind of that youthful passion. It's like, oh, I hate you. Why do I hate this person? Like, and then they find out, oh, I hate them because I love them. Versus like this. Is there another relationship where it's not love at first sight, but there's
Oh boy, audience. Not I'm sure that there is, and I'm sure that I'm just on the spot and missing it, but this is definitely the most known of those where it does feel right. It's a relationship that has grown out of knowing one another, not a relationship that has necessarily grown out of I see your face and I immediately fall for you. I will, just because otherwise I will get an email about this. I do acknowledge that in Romeo and Juliet, they are masked when they meet, and they also fall in love based on sharing a sonnet together. I do recognize that, but they move very quickly to sex in that one. So they also like each other's language, but
and look, Benedick was willing to do harm towards his friend. He's like, I'll fight him. You know, Romeo kills her cousin. That's not. There's two different things there.
Right. Yeah. Which relationship in Merchant of Venice, John? Because Portia's happens almost immediately. Portia's love happens on a turn of a dime. So I think now I question myself. But but yeah. And shoot, I had something. So right. So going back to this soliloquy, it does then seem to me that maybe as we come all the way back around, is there also frustration in the mind of someone like Benedick who has fallen in love before, or at least fallen into affection, but has done it through getting to know somebody, like we should. Like, is some of the frustration at the top more about that Claudio doesn't speak to Hero until they're like, he has a different person woo her for him, right? And I actually thought that in your production, I actually thought y'all made some brilliant choices about clearly showing just with looks in the first scene that there is some pre-existing knowledge of the two of them, that they've had something prior. But according to the language of the play, he doesn't. He's just like, she's cute. Yeah. And she's like, he's hot, and I'll do what my dad says. And the dad is like, I'll do what the prince says. And it happens. And I guess I wonder, it almost makes me wonder if he's arguing, when he says falling in love in this speech, if he is actively arguing against that version of falling in love, rather than his version of I get to know somebody. Because even when he does fall, he doesn't fall like Claudio fell. Did you think about that at all when you were doing it?
Oh yeah, I think it's in the language with the shallow follies and others. Like, I just saw you, and now I will move mountains and men to wed you. And I don't know I don't know if you even same language. But I think that is quite often the passionate, youthful love, and I do think Benedick had that once. Had it happen. In ours, it might have happened with Beatrice, but he's a young kid, he doesn't know what he's doing, and rather than making the dire leap into the flames of forever, he thought about it for a second. I was like, oh, what are we doing? I gotta go do some stuff. I'll be right back. And then when he did, it was years later, and there's school, and there's anger, and it's hard to come back from that emotionally. It's hard to become vulnerable again when you know the last time you weren't ready for it, let alone someone did you wrong. In Beatrice's case, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it does. It's an interesting point because I do think that a lot of, as you put it like that, it feels like a lot of Shakespeare's characters. I hesitate to say like fatal flaw, but like a lot of the dramatic tension in Shakespeare's characters come from characters who are weirdly too smart, so they see through that first layer of action that is expected of them. So like Benedick we wouldn't have a play if Benedick had just gone, yeah, I've fallen in love with Beatrice. I'm a gentleman in the town. She's a lady in the town. Let's get married. That's how this works. Is that he had the intelligence and the imagination to see a world of being married and whatever, and to go, whoa, and maybe acted badly, but basically hesitated because his mind was too big. Hamlet is the same way, right? Hamlet's the greatest example of this. He's so galaxy brained that he has trouble concluding actions. I actually don't think he has trouble starting actions, but he has trouble
No.
concluding them because he can see all the different versions. He's got too much of a mind in some ways. And it's interesting that you seem to be saying that Benedick in some has the same flaw. But it's not a flaw. It's also a great gift, but it can turn into a flaw when what is expected in society is that you go, she's cute, and she goes, he's cute, and then you're married.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I do have to ask. This is like a slight tangent, but just because I do think it's fun, and I know you have the other speech prepared at the end of the soliloquy. There is. I'm curious how you, as an actor, played knowing technically that the second soliloquy makes a joke out of this soliloquy and how you land that. So, for example, the first 4 lines of this, or 5 lines of this, right? I do much wonder that one man, seeing how much another man is a fool when he dedicates his behavior to love, will, after he hath laughed at such shallow follies in others, become the argument of his own scorn by falling in love. Is literally exactly what is about to happen to you in 5 minutes. And then and you kind of comment on that in the second speech. I was wondering if you were willing, if you could give us the lines to the second speech, which I think you have, and then talk a little bit about, weirdly, maybe the technique of how to land this weird joke on oneself between the 2 soliloquies.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you. And Jessica, I can disappear off the screen for him reading this if you want. No one needs to see me.
Just me. This can be no trick. And the conference was sadly born. They have the truth of this from Hero. They seem to pity the lady. Seems her affections have their full bent. Love me. Why, it must be requited. I hear I am censured. They say I will bear myself proudly if I perceive the love come from her. They say, too, that she'll rather die than give any sign of affection. I didn't ever think to marry. I must not seem bold. I must not seem proud. Happy are they that hear their attractions and can put them to mending. They say the lady is fair. To the truth, I can bear them witness. And virtuous, well, 'tis so. I cannot reprove it. And wise. But for loving me by my troth, it is no addition to her wit, nor no great argument of her folly, for I will be horribly in love with her. I may chance have some odd quirks or remnants of wit broken on me because I have railed so long against marriage, but doth not the appetite alter? A man loves the meat in his youth that he cannot endure in his age. So quips and sentences and these paper bullets of the brain are a man from the career of his humor. No, the world must be peopled. When I said I would die a bachelor, I did not think I should live till I were married. Here comes Beatrice. By this day, she's a fair lady. I do spy some marks of love in her.
Great. Okay. Well, I mean, you landed it just then. I was laughing. The yeah, the yeah, I just love the fact that he like does his first argument is like people evolve, as if you didn't make that speech. Like you're acting as if it was at the beginning of the play, not 5 minutes
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah,
Um,
obviously, I am a man of such high intelligence that it could change my mind based on new information. Like, I feel like that's like his
right.
backpedaling of everything he said. But and then there's just a trick of like you put one argument on one side and one argument on the other, and you just go between them.
Yeah, the pure antithesis argument. Yeah, the Proteus
Yeah.
argument, though. I do much wonder as one. Yeah. But the yeah, so going back to the thing about the audience, you're clearly talking to the audience here. It seems to me talking to the audience here. The moment in this speech, the moment about like some people might make fun of me for having like just railed about it. That is, when you say that, is that like trying to kind of, and like I know kind of a thing with the audience, like no, I know what I just said, I got it, I got you. How do you make sure that both technically as an actor and as Benedick, that it is clear that you are referring to that speech you just gave 5 minutes ago where you railed forever against it?
Wow. I think that one is the turn because the line before, for me, is the first time he admits that he loves her. He says, "I will be horribly in love with her," and it's a positive idea, which immediately turns into a negative of, "Oh wait, there are people that are gonna make fun of me, like I was making fun of him for doing that same thing." But my case is different. Can't I change my mind? I'm older now than I was then. I used to want to play the field, but now I just want to, stay home, maybe watch some Netflix with a lovely person. So I think the change of, oh, I can't control the fact that I love her, and if she loves me, then I love her twice as much, and I'm not going to be able to hide that anymore. So I got to come up with new ways of making this argument okay.
Yeah, and it's really interesting watching you do it because I do think that Benedick, there is a risk with him that he is unlikable, right? Like because he does hide his emotions. He does do some of that like bro-ish thing, right? Like a lot of his jokes are kind of broy, and in that way where I feel like there's some, but like hearing you fall for her and then also accept your detractions is such an interesting moment with him. And like the actual, like, yes, I know it's funny, but also there's some odd for lack of a better word, pathos in that moment of like they say she's wise except for loving me, especially in a world, as you said, where like you were at fault. Is that I don't know, when you said it that time, that line really hit me, that it's funny that he's like, well, she's wise, well, I mean, except for me, but also like you probably deserve that, right?
Yeah.
Like you deserve that shot. um and it's great hearing language, especially when I'm not able to read along with it, like with this one. And your other one that you just said again that popped out to me is that, of course, Benedick is the only person in the world who would use the adjective horribly to describe in love with her. Right? I will be horribly in love with her. Like, this is going to be awful, but I'll do it anyway. Which is really great. It makes him, I think you maybe it was just the brilliant choice of really making sure that Benedick himself also knows that it was his fault what happened before the play, but you managed very strongly to avoid any possibility that the audience will dislike you. Like you're very
Well, I
we're with you.
try.
But you make him, because he's very, very human, which is both a credit to you and to Shakespeare, of like his flaws are flaws that we recognize. We
Yeah,
recognize in guys.
I think he's one of those people that you know when you see someone like this where they're the loudest person in the room, they're always making everything a joke, that it's not a malicious reason that they're doing these things. It's kind of them covering up for insecurities. And I guess the only way we can get away with Benedick that way is if like you still go like, I'm not gonna blow up the world for this guy. I'm just gonna like let them go about the way they think they can go about things without ruining their day. Versus if he's extremely unlikable, I think everyone, including Beatrice, Claudia, would just be like, we all know that you messed up.
Right.
We all, yeah.
And then we wouldn't cheer for them to be together, but instead you see someone who messed up in their youth and someone who's in a society which makes it hard for him to apologize, who then, with the help of his friends and with the help of a relationship based on wit and communication, actually get through. I mean, the wonderful speech, which I realize, the wonderful scene, which is obviously overwhelmed with the Claudio plot, but the Beatrice, you love me scene in the chapel, the kill Claudio scene in the chapel, is such a beautiful scene of two people who communicate brilliantly, right? Like they communicate with each other in a way that new lovers don't, in that scene, which I feel like you earn through what you're talking about right now. You earn through making them have a relationship based on wit and communication and maturity.
And I think that's where the prose comes back into play, because it's sincere versus the heightened. All I can think of was Romeo and Juliet for some reason, but like the language is so heightened that like, of course you're talking about stars and heavens and all these things that are so much bigger than us, whereas it's a very grounded moment of kill your best friend.
Right. Yeah.
I know you just said you love me. If you do love me, do it. No flowery poetry language around it.
Right. I'm just going to say it as it is. And that is, yeah, it's interesting that he so often puts that, just to use Romeo and Juliet, he actually so often puts that language in the language of women, even in verse, is that Juliet is the one who's like, do you love me? Right. It's like, don't swear to the moon. Don't swear to this. If you're going to swear by yourself. Just say the words. Kill Claudia. And it's interesting how Shakespeare can almost manipulate his own use of language to show that stuff, and use both imagery as this incredible depth of insight or over the topedness. Like he can use it both ways, which is fascinating. And in this one, he hones that down, which is beautiful. Kind of like to be or not to be. That is a question. That is the question, right? Like that's a verse line, but that's about as honed down as we
Pointed.
get. That's
very pointed.
Right. We don't get. I've always made the joke that you could do Hamlet in like 90 minutes if you just made every soliloquy just the opening line, because the rest of the soliloquy is just him talking about his opening line. So you could just tone it down and do that, and you'd be through it. I do know I'm having a lot of fun, but we're actually near time. Jessica, are there any questions that we need to be worrying about? If not, that's great. I'm seeing a head shake. We've got all of this magic happening behind the scenes, y'all. Everybody, you don't even know who Jessica is. But we so we can start to draw this to a close, Grantham, because I don't want to take too much more of your time. Thank you for coming on. I know you were a little bit under the weather, so I very much appreciate you still being able to make time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I look forward to the next time we might see each other in physical person.
Hey, there's always a hope of that happening.
Yeah, what a strange dream. And if you all are interested in seeing this production, you can see a very well filmed version of it on PBS. So do look it up. It's great. I don't believe in definitive versions of Shakespeare, but it is a truly wonderful version of this show. And Grantham is truly incredible in it. So please do go check that out and check out Grantham and all of his upcoming projects, which are all very hush hush. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
great
then,
performances, PBS, Much Ado About Nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, great performance. Yes. And now I need to, Grantham, now I'm going to do 2 to 3 minutes of what's coming up next for us at Red Bull, but I won't force you to stay and pretend to look interested. So I'm just going to take you off and let everybody know. But thank you so much again for joining. Bye. And for everybody who's still watching, we have a bunch of programming coming up, starting with this coming 31st of January. I'm directing an online reading of The Wonder of Women, which is a Jacobean grim, dark, tragic comic, something or other by John Marston. It's going to be a lot of fun. Check it out. It's a very strange, interesting play. After that, from February 1st through the 14th, we are going to be streaming on demand our off-Broadway production of The Alchemist that we did this fall, live in person. People sat down in audiences with one another. Actors were on stage with one another. It was great. It was an absolute romp and a ton of fun, and you'll be able to check that out if you missed it in person online from February 1st to 14th. You can go to our website for more information. And then on February 28th, we will be doing a reading live and in person of César's A Tempest, but that we will also be live streaming that live reading. So you will be able to see that as well. And there's more information on our website. If you enjoyed this Podversation and have not seen any of our others, they're all available on our website as well as on YouTube. And thank you all again for coming and spending this evening with us. All of our online programming is free, so that only happens with the support of people like you. So if you can make a gift to support Red Bull Theater and the creation of vital classical theater, that would be much appreciated. That's all we've got tonight. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon.